Welcome everyone to the Serious Leisure podcast. My name is Petya Petrova. I'm your host for today's podcast. I'm joined by our regular podcast contributors, Dr. Sam Elkington and Kat Branch. Sam is from Teesside University. He's our Serious Leisure expert. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Petya. Nice to be back. Thank you very much.
It's nice to have you back, Sam. Kat leads the University of the West of England Centre for Music. Welcome, Kat.
Hello, Petya. Great to be back again.
Great to see you too, fresh and well. We often refer to the University of the West of England as UWE. If you hear that sound later on, that's what we talk about. In this podcast, we share stories about our leisure pursuits, our passions, our hobbies, and our interests. We reflect on our attempts to successfully or not balance work and leisure time. And we draw insights from the serious leisure perspective and the vast literature on that topic. This is the first episode for our season 3 of the podcast. We're recording this in January 2022. You can find past episodes on our original series on the SoundCloud app if you want to check these out. This is an interesting time to start our season 3. We often found ourselves starting our seasons at the start of yet another lockdown or at an interesting time for all of us experiencing in wider society. At the moment, we're also at the point where people might make New Year's resolutions or think about how their last year has been. So before we delve into the podcast, I think as a way of introducing ourselves as podcast contributors to our audience, I would just ask Kat and Sam to tell us about how their December has been. How are they finding coming back to work, and how the place of leisure in their lives has changed, morphed? What does leisure mean to you? What are your hobbies, etc., etc.? Kat, you had an interesting December. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it was very difficult because I caught COVID, like many people will have done. But I have to say, I naively thought, it'll be a couple of weeks of flu and then we'll be back in. It was a very busy time for us at the Centre for Music. Christmas for all musicians is a special kind of hell. And I'd expected to be doing the rounds of carol services and Christmas concerts and events that we deliver and that I also do outside of work. But in fact, what happened was I experienced a really extreme exhaustion and found that even going upstairs to take a bath was beyond me on many days. So it completely slowed me down. And I think I resisted this for 2 or 3 weeks, thinking, I'll be fine. I'll be fine in a minute. And then somewhere in week 4, started to accept that wasn't what was going to happen. And I actually just need to change my mental attitude, because in fact, I was creating more mental exhaustion by the continual disappointment and surprise and frustration, which is a ridiculous waste of my energy. And so whilst I'm really pleased to say I'm starting to function a lot better now, it's definitely repositioned my priorities, because I've had to choose what I'm going to spend the spoons in a drawer on. And if you don't know what I mean by spoons in a drawer, this is a common way of measuring energy as an analogy which you might have heard about. And so the amount of spoons in my drawer is now considerably less, which means I have to be really judicious about what I spend it on. And I found that taking time for activities that will recharge me is absolutely essential. Now, in the middle of last year, I went through Couch to 5K and got into running, and I'm not a sporty person, so I'm so looking forward to hearing what Laura has to say a bit later in the podcast about that journey. But I must admit, it was really disappointing to have it interrupted by this exhaustion. And so now I've had to set myself a goal of, first it was getting to walk up my own stairs without having to include my hands in that process. That was the goal. I'm now at the stage where I can walk to my local shop. So that's exciting. But in fact, trying to reframe my thinking about that experience has made it less depressing. It's about trying to accept it, I think, and measuring the little steps. and then rediscovering joy in other things. And whether that has just been reading books that have sat on my bedside table with me thinking, yeah, I'm totally going to read that fantastic feminist discussion that I really want to read. I've actually started reading it. Some nice trashy fiction that I really enjoy, but always feel like, ooh, don't waste your time on trashy fiction. You should be doing something more wholesome and more about personal growth. And being so unwell has made me think, stuff it, I'm reading the trashy fiction. I've really enjoyed that. It's been lovely. To be honest, the thing that I've neglected over this time has been music, because it's so deeply associated with work for me, even though, you know, the focus of my work is about creating music for leisure purposes for everybody. But for myself, it sits firmly in this workplace. And so I've sort of abandoned it completely for this period. And that is one thing that I now want to change. The thing with music is if you don't do it, you start to lose contact with the skill set, actually. So I want to start bringing it back in, but in a way that is, to use the kind of language that Sam will often say, for it to feel non-coerced. So I'm going to choose some light pieces of music that I enjoy playing, and I'm going to have a go at those. I'm going to take some time to do a little bit of singing where breathing will allow. And I'm just going to do that for my enjoyment. I think that is going to be a healthy way forward for me. So that's where we are, going gently into January 2022, and really relieved to be able to rejoin you here on the podcast after several weeks off. So Sam, how's your December been?
Yeah, no, Kat, I empathise completely, and it is great to see you back. I know how poorly you were. So, so my October through to December was interrupted by COVID. And it did take me, similar to you, I mean, I had probably 8 weeks where I wasn't myself at all. Well, for the first 6 weeks, I wasn't anything at all. I was pretty poorly with it. But again, I'm quite an active person. I like to keep fit. And that was just not an option to me. So you take that, one of the big kind of things out of my daily routine, which is purely for me, and for no other reason than to, you know, reset my kind of my subjective well-being and my internal equilibrium, if you like. To not have that, in the absence of that, there was nothing else other than work, really, and work that I was having to catch up on. So my kind of whole semester one became condensed into 7 weeks. So by the time I actually had it for the first time in forever, I had an extended break over Christmas. I'd already planned this pre-COVID, BC, before COVID, and it was much. I didn't realize how much I needed it until about halfway through. I don't know if anybody finds this. It normally takes me about a week to 10 days to completely kind of turn my brain off, because I am very analytical. I'm all in. I think everybody's in the same boat here. I think all the listeners will probably be in the same boat as well. And it normally takes me about 10 days. And this is why having a week off doesn't help me at all, because by the time I come back to work, I'm only just starting to settle down. But halfway through this, we went to do lots of outdoor activities with the kids. I actually picked up archery for the first time in a long time. Now, this is something that we haven't spoken about before, but I do have a history with archery. My grandparents used to own a pub when I grew up, and that's a history, and that's a story we can get into another time. But it was one of the most awesome things to have as a child, is to have your own pub grounds to run around in. But they used to run archery competitions, believe it or not, at this pub, country pub. And from a very early age, I was really, really into it. And we had a long garden, very lucky to have a long garden at home, and used to do archery at home. So I've picked this up with the kids over one of my oldest, particularly, who's now 10, and strong enough to hold a bow. And we did it, and we both absolutely loved it. And we're now exploring options to continue doing it in our, of course, what's interesting there, it would be a shared activity, which I'm all for, sharing the after work activities with our kids, whether that be football or whatever. But it was something very much that it was a reconnecting with something that I'd previously knew I had an interest in. So that was quite a interesting kind of journey to go on over the Christmas period, is reconnecting with something I had done quite a long time ago. But really, for me, it was all about family time. It was downtime. It was, the whole family had COVID in October. So it gave everybody an opportunity just to reset and it, for me, COVID, like you, Kat, it was a refocusing exercise. It was okay, well, what really does matter most here? I can't do it all. And I went through a similar kind of process. And actually, I feel quite at peace with, I've actually spent most of the last night and this morning just going, right, what matters most to me in the next 6 months? Planning my time and prioritizing me first. And COVID will do that to you, I think. I certainly share that with you. So, yeah, Christmas, December was that. It was, and then you're coming back, and I do sense a slightly different view or worldview as a consequence of that. And, that what matters most kind of question, I also was reminded of a book that I read about sports performance. Bear with me. And the book's called "Will It Make the Boat Go Faster?" And it's really interesting because it's all about, okay, well, if you want to perform at the best level, at your height, you'll perform your best, whatever that might be. Now, what are the things that you're doing, and will it make the boat go faster? And by that will it help in that overall goal of doing whatever it is you want to do? And do you actually have a sense of what that goal or those goals are? And I think we get so bogged down in our day-to-day routines and competing, tensions of this, that, and the other. And typically, work is probably 85% of that we don't really spend any time thinking about whether it's making the boat go faster. The boat, of course, is ourselves. So I think that was something that really hit me over the festive break, something I've certainly heading into 2022 with a kind of bolstered sense of, right, okay, whatever I'm doing, will it make the boat go faster? And like I say, the boat being myself and my own well-being. So yeah, I think me and Kat have had a similar but obviously different experience, but it's certainly similar in terms of that realization. But so certainly looking forward to 2022, doing more of this. For those that have listened before, and even those that haven't, this is for us as the organisers become quite therapeutic, actually, in terms of talking about leisure collectively, but also hearing other people's stories and realising actually we're all experiencing similar things, and stealing little bits from people in terms of those life hacks that people have managed to work out for themselves. So very much looking forward to what 22 has to bring, and hopefully COVID-free for most of it.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Kat. I dare not say that I've avoided COVID so far, because the moment you say you've avoided it, you're just tempting fate. But I had an interesting December where you were using the metaphor of a boat. I felt like my boat was stuck in one place and spinning around. And I've been reading a lot around burnout, but I very much felt cognitively overloaded, like my brain could no longer process an information. And I wouldn't even be able to read a book in the evening. I'm okay with audiobooks, but I just couldn't focus. And then I had, like Sam, an extended break, and much of that break was spent not being ill with COVID, but kind of having headaches and migraines. And I know lots of people, sometimes the moment you go on a break, on holiday, the first thing you do is fall ill with a cold or something. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I decompress, and particularly on days when I'm working from home, the fact that I would finish work and then I might go on Twitter, and then I might read a book, or then I might watch a movie or a TV series. And at no time have I given my brain time and space to rest. So I've been doing a lot of thinking around decompressing. And my hobby is great. So I've been continuing with my improv theatre work. For those of you who've listened all the way back to our episode 2, when I talked about it, and I was saying I was just taking classes, I'm now part of an improv group, and we had our first performances in October and November, and that's great. And that's a lot of fun. But that is also cognitively quite taxing. So it's releasing in one way, but also taxing in another way. And now I'm just experimenting with things like, short meditations before going to bed, and taking frequent breaks, and experimenting with the Pomodoro method, etc., to just make sure that I don't feel like I'm spinning in circles again. And and to manage, the pressures of work better. So this is where you find us as podcast contributors. But importantly, today we have two guests here with us to talk about their leisure interests, their leisure pursuits, and also how they approach being serious about leisure. In previous seasons and previous episodes, we have had some really inspirational or awe-inspiring guests who've taken their hobbies and interests into a nearly professional domain. But being serious about leisure doesn't mean becoming a professional or the best swimmer or runner, etc. It can also just mean being serious about making time for leisure. And I'm really excited to have here today with us Laura Quick, who is Senior Lecturer in Occupational Therapy at our new School of Health and Social Wellbeing, who is going to talk to us about her journey from couch to 5K. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Petya. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Thanks, Laura. And we also have today with us Emma Wingate. Emma is a Senior Wellbeing Practitioner at our UWE Wellbeing Service. Welcome, Emma.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And Emma is going to talk to us about how she approaches leisure in her time and how she is serious in her approach to taking time for leisure, which I'm really excited to hear more about, as well as Laura's couch to 5K story, because I have been pondering about doing something like that and I haven't quite gotten off the couch. But before we delve into that, I'm really curious to find out a little bit about Laura and Emma's professional roles and what these roles involve. I think there are some interesting insights in terms of your professional backgrounds that would enrich our conversation even further today. So, Laura, could you just tell us what your role is and what your day job involves, please?
Well, yes. So I'm an occupational therapist, first and foremost, and I was working in the NHS until March of 2021. Yes, I was forgetting what year we're in. So I've been at UWE for 9 months, and I specialised in mental health and complex case work. So I was had a specific interest around sensory processing and supporting people with complex diagnosis, so something like Huntington's and dementia, and trying to understand their world and understand how they understood their world and how we could enable them to engage in the things that were important to them. So we use, as part of our intervention strategies, we use occupation. So we use leisure roles and previous occupations and new occupation, exploring new things as people go through major life changes due to their health, and support them into becoming engaged back in the world that they want to be engaged in. So it's a very positive profession, and it's a very moving forward profession. So having done 22 years in the NHS, I was very keen that I help support the next breed of OTs to come into the NHS who are desperately needed due to COVID and the experiences that Kat and Sam have had around long COVID and fatigue and things. There's a huge need now for occupational therapists and physios to support that rehabilitation process for people. So that's where I come from, and that's why I approach maybe the couch to 5K maybe a different way than others would do.
Thank you, Laura. I can't wait to hear more about it. Emma was one of our guests who approached us and kind of volunteered herself to be a guest. I'm afraid I volunteered Laura. But I'm always very curious about when people why Emma volunteered to be a guest in this podcast, and I have a suspicion that it also has something to do with Emma's day job. So Emma, can you please tell us about your day job, please?
Yes, of course. So I am a senior wellbeing practitioner at UWE. I am one of the counsellors that works within the wellbeing team. We have a fabulous mixed interdisciplinary team. So we've got a team of counsellors, we've got a team of mental health practitioners who come from a variety of backgrounds, including things like occupational therapy and social work, and also a specialist drug and alcohol practitioner. So yeah, I provide one-to-one counselling to students while they're at UWE to try and support them so that they can do what they've come to UWE to do and get their degree and do that in the best way that they can. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. When you approached me about talking to us on this podcast, you mentioned the word practice what I preach. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So within the UWE Wellbeing Service, we use a solution-focused approach, which as a vast oversimplification basically means that we try to focus on the things that help rather than the things that hinder. So I'm often talking to students about the things that really matter to them. And as Sam was saying earlier, that stuff that really matters to people, the stuff that makes your boat go faster. And I loved Kat's analogy of the energy and spoons in a drawer as well. I usually talk to students about it as like the energy bar in a computer game, but hopefully it's a similar idea. So I'm always talking to my clients about, what are the things that recharge you? What are the things that you do that make you feel good in your body? Because university is a stressful time of life, and it should be, because being in education is challenging and it should be stressful in a positive way. But part of what I'm sort of picking up over the years that I've been working as a counsellor in higher education is that there's a real focus for everybody who comes into it with, I must get this particular thing at the end of it. I have to get a 2-1, or I have to get this particular grade so that I can then go on and be successful in the career that comes afterwards. And I just think in our society and our culture generally, there's so much focus on outcome and goals and measurement and is what you're doing getting you closer towards that goal, that we've completely neglected that idea of actually time doesn't always have to be used efficiently, and sometimes the most efficient way to get somewhere is to kind of take a roundabout route. I think it was one of the things that came up in your really early podcasts, and actually for me and my connection with this podcast, I started at UWE in September 2020, so we were fully remote. I wasn't able to go in and be with my colleagues physically. So I was just getting to know my team, and I was getting to know the organisation completely online. And this podcast was one of the things that I found that helped me kind of build that sense of connection to UWE. And I was so delighted in the early part of the podcast to hear the kind of conversations that you've had today, to introduce yourselves as well. I feel like the podcast has come back to the place where it started from, of, rather than focusing solely on mastery and people who are doing their serious leisure pursuits in a very advanced way. I'm kind of here because I want to be like the anti-perfectionist. Can we be beginners? Can we, do what's possible? A bit like both Kat and Sam were saying, actually, if you have a serious illness, or if there's other kind of stressful things going on in life as well, sometimes it's about still being serious about your leisure in making time for it, without having to. Petia sort of summarised it earlier when she said that idea of being serious about leisure rather than having a serious leisure pursuit, because sometimes it's about what is possible rather than big, high achievements.
Thanks, Emma. Sam, would you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I just want to follow up on that. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. If we come back to, the word serious and the connotations that brings, obviously, it drums up all kinds of it can have, and I'm sure Emma, well, actually both Laura and Emma in both of your lines of work, you're having conversations, a dialogue there where things are very serious. There are serious conditions or consequences or challenges that individuals face. But actually, the meaning of the word serious in the context of leisure, as we're talking about it here, is that really that earnestness. It's a commitment, it's an attitude towards leisure, as opposed to being that. What serious would, if we were to talk about serious academia, for example, academia would have a very different connotation of the word serious, wouldn't it? So, I think that disconnect and that disaggregation with the personal, or sorry, the professional mastery, and then the serious connotations of that. Are you serious about your job role? Well, yeah, I am. But taking leisure seriously, as we've just discussed, and as Emma, as you've just outlined there, I think it has a different connotation. It's that earnestness. It's that doing things for the sake of doing it to the best of our ability, and that ability might well be as a novice, but it's because of what the benefits that it derives for us personally. So yeah, wonderful distinction.
Yeah, I think in a therapeutic context, we would usually talk about that idea of being intentionality, or at least that's how I would say it as well. Being intentional about what you spend your energy on, being intentional about what you include in your life.
Thanks, Emma. Which brings us nicely to Laura's story about intentionally getting off the couch. Segue. Intentionally getting off the couch and trying to run 5K as a novice, and maybe working within what's possible, I would assume. I'm really looking forward to hearing this story, Laura.
Absolutely, Petty. Working within what's possible is very important when you turn 50. So that's what happened to me. Is I turned 50. I had teenage children, and I was considering applying for full-time work, having worked part-time for a lot of years, and I was thinking, I can't do this. How am I going to have the energy to work full-time? How am I going to get myself fitter? What am I going to do to support this? So in 2019, I started my journey, May 2019, of Couch to 5K, and decided this could be a good option. I had been a gym member, but it was a private gym with a personal trainer because I needed to do lots of rehab post-babies. And she left and went off abroad and abandoned me. So I tried an ordinary gym down the road, but they were far too noisy. I'm very sensory sensitive, and I couldn't cope in that environment. So I thought, this isn't going to work. But I like the free weights, and I like that kind of sensation of moving. So I thought, what can I do? And then my sister's a very keen runner. Friends are keen runners. I thought, I could try running, but it's the last thing I would choose to do. But it's cheap and it's easy and it's outside the front door. So I thought, okay, let's try this. I went running with my teenage daughter. That was my first big mistake. She ran me into the ground. And the next day I had to do a working from home because I couldn't physically move. It's no good laughing at me, Sam. I couldn't move. I was so bad, much to my kids' amusement. I then broke my foot kicking the bottom of the swimming pool, teaching my kids how to do synchronized swimming. So that put me out for about 6 months. And then I decided, I was going to do this. I was going to get back into doing this over the winter. And I started to do my Couch to 5K. And I thought, if I start before Christmas, then I won't put all the weight on over Christmas. And if I can do it through the winter, then I can do it. So I started very gradually. Week 2 is, pardon my language, it's really hard. And it was so dreadful. I never wanted to go back there, so I had to keep going. And I was doing, and by week 5, I'd got it. But it took me 7 weeks to get to week 5 because I just keep repeating or walking a bit and then doing a bit. And I suddenly found myself wanting to go out. Even when it was raining, I needed to run, which was a very strange, surreal experience. Still was really hard work for the first 10 minutes until my lungs finally gave in and I could breathe. And then I was doing really well, but I had this bit of a tight calf muscle, was taking a bit of care with it. And then I went to a friend's wedding and pogoed the night away in flats because I was looking after my calf muscle. Completely tore my calf muscle because normally I dance in heels. So I was gutted. I was absolutely gutted. And then we went into lockdown.
Sorry, Laura, before you continue, for our audience, there was a big cringe for all the faces I currently see on Zoom. It's like, you did what? Ouch. Oh no, that sounds horrid.
It was quite painful, it has to be said. More emotionally, struggle as well, having finally kind of conquered the feel of getting out and doing exercise. So I really feel for you, Kat, about that, not being able to get out and do it. And then I saw a very nice physio who gave me lots of TLC and exercises, and basically had to rest it and start to do these specific exercises to stretch it out. And I hadn't been doing the right exercises after running, so I hadn't been doing the right cool down. So that's what had caused it, and the dancing was just the final straw. So then in the August 2020, I decided that I needed to get fit. I was looking for full-time work. I needed to get fit. And I did start running again with my teenage daughter, but I also went with my neighbour, who's similar fitness and age as me. And we would plod along, and my daughter would run off ahead of us and then join us back at home. And we just plodded through from August 2020 to March 2021. So I finally did my first 5K run on the Sunday before I started work here at UWE. And it was very, very rewarding. And what we did is we just took our time over it. We repeated weeks. If we only did 2 runs that week, it didn't matter. We just do a bit more or just stay where we were. We were helping each other through life events and what was happening in terms of COVID and business closures and family illness and everything else. And this kind of just running together kept us going really through it all. And it was just, an interesting time of doing it. The one thing I would say at the end, though, is I ran the 5K, but not in the 30 minutes. I got to 3.5K in 30 minutes. I'm a very slow plodder, so don't expect yourself to get to 5K by the end of the training. Take that pressure off yourself. It's more about the running for 30 minutes. Kat, did you want to?
Yeah, Laura, I was just saying what an amazing relief it is just hearing you talk about that experience, because I feel so disheartened to have lost all the progress I made with Couch to 5K. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but I feel like my fitness is some sort of lasts the length of a sparkler, basically. And the second I stop exercising, the sparkler is straight in the bucket. And so next time I go out, I feel like I'm yet again starting from zero. So I was thinking, how am I even going to restart this? Can I even find the motivation? And then listening to you describing the permission you gave yourself to just be like, well, might just do 2 runs this week, it's fine. Might just repeat that weekend. Because when I did it, I was really like, must do 3 runs, must move forward every week or death, which actually was a sort of unhelpful attitude. Yeah. It's an attitude I have in my work life, which helps me do the job I have to do, but it doesn't help my leisure life, funnily enough. So I really appreciate your description. And also finding a buddy who could, make that work. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I feel for you, because September came and I'm a module leader and I was teaching and I was doing my qualifications to teach. And suddenly I was working 6 days a week. So the runnings just went by the by. So I'm restarting now, and I've restarted by walking. But I know that I can do it. I know it is achievable now, and I will get back to that running feeling. And I'm looking forward to that feeling of that euphoria at the end, though the actual running is still pretty hard work.
Yeah, but actually just the process. The process is actually the heart of it, isn't it? So starting with walking, I need to say this to myself, get myself a Post-it note on the laptop.
I have a feeling Sam wants to say something about the process.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's all, I mean, in another life, I used to run and work in health and fitness gyms. So I used to do all the training stuff, and which is another bind that I have as much it used to be kind of every day. And it was what I did. And now I have to find time elsewhere to do these things. But it is focusing on the process, having worked with people with their fitness goals, for instance. It is, okay, yeah, you might want to get there, but there's a journey to be had here, and everybody's got a different journey. Everybody's different. Everybody's physiology is different. Yes, we all want to be able to run. I will never run a marathon. I know this. I'm 6'3" and 16 stone. You don't get to do that if you're that size and not then do yourself a mischief at the end of it. It's just, I know that's physically not something I should be doing, but I do enjoy running. I think the key word here is movement, and I think Emma mentioned this. This whole just moving, just physically moving, being active. Yeah, and I think in academia and certainly in the realms of Emma and Laura, your work kind of context, we are active, but it's typically an intellectual or mental one. Yeah, and I think there's a more kind of holistic kind of gain here, isn't there? I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but when I'm working out, and just for I'm doing this for the benefit of people in the room online who I'm talking to today. If I move out of the way, you'll see this contraption behind me. My other half for my 40th bought me a rower. So I because when lockdown came, I couldn't get to the gym. I like free weights. I used to do CrossFit, all of this kind of stuff. I don't get to do that at the house. There isn't the space. I've got two small humans running around. There's health and safety issues. But I can lock the door here and I can row for as long as I want now. And that's really been a game changer for me. So, it's the process, but it's the getting up and going out bit. There's a commitment, there's a perseverance, there's the process being that, okay, I might go for a run. I did a similar thing, Laura. I took my 10-year-old out for a run with me. And I don't know whether, teenage to 10-year-old, but this, Charlie is a typical 10-year-old, yeah? Doesn't fatigue. There is no fatigue in children under the age of probably 13. Right, so he'll go, and he's turning round, he's running backwards, just as fast as I'm running forward, and he's chatting away to me, and I'm trying to hold a conversation with my child, engage him. But it's the last thing I wanted to do. But I like the idea of that companionship and doing something together. But more importantly, it's just that commitment, it's that perseverance, and it's the having a go, and it's committing to not the act as such, but the process of doing something active. And I think it's something everybody can empathize with and engage with. I love that. Sorry, Laura, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just on the commitment front. And I was, because I have a friend who runs marathons, my sister runs marathons, and I talked to them about how do you get out of the front door? And they had exactly the same issues getting out the front door, and they run marathons. So I was thinking, actually, maybe I'm setting myself up too high a step here, thinking that I want to go out the front door, and just acknowledge I don't want to go out the front door. It's wet and it's cold. So what I did was I changed my routine so that I got up in the morning, drink of water, spoonful of honey, and then off I went out the front door, so that I didn't give myself the chance to sit on the couch or pick up Angry Birds or do anything else that I would normally do to get myself out the door. And just hearing that kind of permission of it's okay to it not feel good and it just be hard work. I did say foolishly to my sister that when I met her up last week, I said, I'd really like to just get to the point where I could run with ease, and that feeling, some of that feeling in your body, I have this strong memory. I did martial arts, and I loved that feeling of being able to move again and nothing be stiff in my body at the end of the run. And she just looked at me and went, yeah, it's not going to happen. I wish I could get to that point. She said, okay, I've just got to accept that it is hard work, and I just have to look at the benefits that I have afterwards, which is that I can move without doing, without pain in my hips and my back, and I can get to the top of the hill with the kids on the walk without being out of breath.
Thanks, Laura. This is, really interesting to me because of my journey of trying to be fit and healthy and having these constant setbacks, and like Kat saying, coming back to zero. I wonder how that compares, having one pursuit where you're a novice, how that compares to Emma's experience of being serious about having lots of little things that she does as part of her leisure and keeping that going. Emma, would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing for me has been about learning to defend my leisure time. Like many people who are working at a university, it's it's a job that I love doing, and I also have a young family, so time is really kind of at a minimum. And I've had to be really, really purposeful about carving spaces out of the day that can be mine and can be leisure. And so I had a similar experience to quite a few of you in that I had an injury a few years ago. And that left me with chronic pain. So all of the things that I would have normally done to cope with stress, things like running, were just not available to me at all. And then, so that happened kind of before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. And for the first couple of weeks, like everyone, I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? How are we going to get through this? And then actually I kind of remembered, oh, okay, I've been through something like this before. I've been through not being able to leave the house very much. What are the things I can do? So the things I settled on were things like getting back into baking. And as Sam was saying earlier, for me, it's about the process. It's that sensory experience. And, I'm somebody who stopped watching Bake Off when it got too fancy. When people were making things where I was just like, I'm never going to be able to make that, I was like, no, it's not for me anymore. I don't want to have that kind of perfectionist attitude to my baking. I just want to do it because it's quite nice to stir a bowl of yummy smelling stuff. And it's a way to spend time. And it's also, you get to eat it at the end of it. It's the perfect activity, as many people discovered during the first lockdown, I think, because there was a shortage of flour everywhere. So yeah, for me, it was things like, getting back into baking and not being perfectionist about it, trying to make it look really beautiful and amazing, but just enjoying the process of doing it and having that be, okay, this is my leisure time now, rather than seeing it as like, I've got to make bread and I must make bread every day in lockdown. I think a lot of people went to that place with it. Kat, did you want to?
Yeah, I was so struck by your comments about the sensory experience, because I feel like there's something so that holds you in the present moment, doesn't it? The sensory experience. And so you're not doing that thing where you're mulling over the past or you're planning for the future and all that mental doing. You can just focus on the here and now. And, just the smell of the batter that you're describing and all of that, it's just kind of liberating and restful. And I feel like, you said, Emma, at the beginning of the podcast today, you were talking about, just keeping the focus, moving on from a focus of kind of mastery and excellence and kind of coming back home, to the idea of taking leisure just, for ourselves, for our well-being. Yeah. And that sensory thing is part of that, isn't it, really? Because if we're aiming to push ourselves towards a certain kind of achievement, it's that future-focused experience, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And where we hold ourselves in our senses about what we're doing in our leisure, that is, I think, the significant part of what gives us a break, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's what we all need more of in our current culture, the way that we live our lives, definitely. Sam?
Yeah, frantically taking notes and trying to process what I want to say at the same time and failing miserably. I think I've spoken about this before on the podcast, I think several times actually, in terms of the notion of it's actually not in the serious leisure literature as such, although I've written about it, but it's actually in the positive psychological or positive psychology literature, particularly flow. And before Petya rolls her eyes, I'm not going to go into that. Talk about that all day. But this whole idea of what Csikszentmihalyi talks about is autotelicism. This is an autotelic experience for ourselves. And autotelic means self-goal. So the actual doing of the activity is all the motivation that we need. Whereas, as Kat has quite rightly outlined, when we're working in our professional lives, there's almost there's an element of this is what I'm working on right now, but there's almost always that, so what now what? in terms of that kind of future focus. And I guess you could take my does this make the boat go faster analogy is future facing in the sense that, well, is this going to help me move forward? But it's the boat, like I say, is ourselves. But that autotelicism, that self goal, that being present in whatever it is we're doing, and giving ourselves permission to do that. And I go back to, obviously Emma and Laura have both kind of picked this out in their descriptions of what it is they've been doing. But Kat, you mentioned this about giving yourself permission to just have a read, and not feel like you should be reading something that's going to further your professional capabilities to do X, Y, or Z. I do this all the time. Popular science, I'll go into Waterstones, for instance, and I'll go and stand next, just so I look like I know what I'm talking about, or I look smart. I'll go and stand in the smart thinking section. I'll go, I could probably use this and use that. But no, it's actually, I love sci-fi and I love that kind of, that genre, and give myself permission to do these things. It's the goal of the activity is the doing of the activity itself. And I think that is such a hugely important message for people to hear.
I just wondered whether for you, Laura, that you can relate, because with the running, certainly when I was doing Couch to 5K, I'd have to say the sensory experience of the actual running was probably not high up there on the enjoyment, with the rain in my face and the waiting for the breathing to settle down. I'd take the baking any time over that. But there is still definitely this well-being benefit, isn't there? I wondered what that's like for you, whether you could describe it for us a little bit.
Well, I realised that I couldn't run with music, so I run just with nature, and I have a set routine that I run as well, and a set path every time, because I like the predictability of it, and I like to watch nature. And I have this route that takes me up a hill and down this wooded lane, so I could see the transport of time and just engage in the natural sounds and the natural world, which I found much more calming to my brain. But I have a very active brain, so I would actually be going through any stress that was, or thoughts, or thinking through problem solving whilst I ran, and a way of kind of engaging that executive functioning. They say that that's supposed to enhance the health well-being feelings, don't they? Engaging the executive function as you're doing the running. And I found it very clarifying in my thinking and removed a lot of the stress. So I find that really helpful.
And was that, did you set that intention, Laura, with the running? Or did you find that that's just what happened while you were doing it? That's what
happened. It's because I realised that I couldn't stand listening to the music. It was just too intense. And it tried to make me run it faster. And I'm a plodder. In fact, I once forgot to set my Strava app, and my Fitbit thought I'd gone for a walk. So that's how slow I am. I'm very methodical and ploddy. And I'd like to say I was this lithe athlete running around, but I'm not. I'm just this red blob that arrives home. But when I come home, I feel much lighter, less stressed. I'm just more able to move. I've incorporated Pilates moves into the end of it, so that's the stretches I do. So that's helped with my health and well-being. And I just feel, and I sleep better, and my hormones are better, and just everything's better. So I know there's a big, long list, a heavy list of why I should go out. And I'm still trying to weigh that up against the going out and starting running again. And I will do it, and you'll have to keep me some ownership around it. But I will get out there, because it is a positive experience in the end. Sam?
Yeah, and I just love the honesty here, in terms of this is exactly how everybody else is feeling. I think so. Working in gyms, January was the time, right? So we typically see a bit of an uptick in members this time of year as people come guilt-ridden post Christmas and want to lose some weight. But there's a high level of attrition, right? So typically, it's funny, you gave a similar kind of time frame. So you were talking kind of 6 weeks in. You were still kind of on the fence as to whether this was going to work for you. But actually, 6 to 8 weeks is where your body starts to react positively to the exercise. And bearing in mind, if you've gone from being relatively inactive to being active, there's a physiological shift, not just a psychological shift, but also a physiological shift that needs to happen. The psychological shift, of course, is probably the most important one, because it's the one that gets you out the door and, gets you out of bed and kicks you out the door again the next day. But this whole kind of bodily experience, I think, is something crucial. You talk about the sensory, it's bodily, isn't it? We live. There's no choice. If I'm lifting heavy weights, I can't really be thinking about much else other than lifting that particular weight. If you're going out running, you've been running for 20 or 30 minutes. Well, you're gonna have to run for another 20, 30 minutes to get home. So there's no other option really for you. You're in the moment. It's that bodily experience, and I think that's something that is, again, we need to emphasize. It's being emphasized. We need to. And you've all been describing this in terms of I gradually start to value that experience for what it provides. And it provides slightly different things. I'm with you in terms of, if I'm really struggling mentally that day, I'll have a workout, I'll go for a run, I'll do something that involves physical movement, because typically that for me recalibrates things. Or, I'll go out and I'll not necessarily intentionally think about what I'm working on. But what'll happen is I come back and, my brain's been cleared. It's like sieving through all the rubbish. And you come back and go, oh, okay, that's it. That's the issue. Or actually, no, it wasn't that much of an issue in the end, and that'll be fine. But just to mention that, what we're talking about here really is what's in the serious leisure perspective, or the realms of the serious leisure perspective, is a hobbyist pursuit. It's a sport or game-like involvement in our leisure time. And there are no rules really in hobbyist pursuits of this nature. Rules are largely self-determined, although we might be looking to others, i.e., the serious runners. We've had some pretty serious runners on the podcast, shall we say. So I certainly wouldn't be putting myself in that category. But the key distinction here is that it is about that. It's that non-competitiveness. It's the completely self-determined, and those rules are something that we kind of define for ourselves. So yeah, just keep moving, Laura. Or it's about having those sensory experiences, Emma. Those hobbyist pursuits give us those benefits. And they are social and individual in equal measure for both of you in terms of how you describe things. But one thing I wonder then is, that hook, you've both talked about the doing of it, the importance of doing of it, and then the continued doing of it. In the nature, so what's the hook then for you? So you've done it now, and you've been doing it for a while, these various kind of hobbyist pursuits. Well, what's the hook? What's bringing you back? I mean, it's kind of tacit in what you've been outlining. But Emma, I wonder, what is it that brings you back? What is the hook that brings you back?
Yeah, for me, it's that sense of space and like claiming space for myself. So in my job as a counsellor, what I do all the time is I hold space for people and what they're bringing. That's what I do in my job. And for me, being serious about leisure is about claiming that time, claiming that space, and having that kind of expansive opportunity where you can reflect. You can, you don't really get into that kind of deep reflection on stuff if you're constantly trying to work out what's the problem. Yeah. And I think this is something I see a lot of the time for students as well. They sort of get into this mode where they feel like they have to be studying all day and all night, and it's got to be all the time because otherwise it doesn't count. And actually I think we all end up missing this as a cultural thing. It's not just about students. It's in our society at the moment. We end up being switched on all the time. So we have no time to switch off, when actually that's really where a lot of the kind of creative problem solving stuff can happen. And I have my own views about why, particularly in education, I think we've gone down a long road of that.
I think for me, Sam, it was it's the flow as I went out post Couch to 5K and started just to run, and we started to try to extend to actually make it to 5K, which I finally did and swore I'd never do again. But it was that kind of that feeling of getting flow and getting lost in the movement and just running would happen for the middle 10 minutes of my 30-minute run. So the first 10 minutes was just getting my lungs to relax and getting into the pace. And then 10 minutes, I would just be running and enjoying it and enjoying that sensation. And then the last 10 minutes was running out of steam and just keeping going and trying to extend, getting up that hill or whatever it is. So that I strongly remember that feeling and really enjoying it and having that sense of flow and being able to not think about anything else, Emma, and just that feeling of just going with it, which is what's attracting me and making me think I will go through the pain of restarting and getting back into it, and hopefully build a routine so that next September, when it all goes mad again, I can then keep doing it.
Yeah. And I think what's really key here is making it part of a routine. It's a habit. Being or seeking out routines that are at service of our personal health and well-being is habitual, and it goes the other way, so that this is an intentional act. But, if we're mindlessly going about our day, it also works the opposite, doesn't it? In terms of the habitual, non-activity or disengagement. That's the easier option, isn't it? It's I'll tap out. I'll not do this today. I'll do it tomorrow or whatever. But it is still a process. It's a process, and you've talked about there, kind of literally, a literal process of, to find the enjoyment in the activity. Largely, it's kind of retrospective enjoyment, right? Most of the time, when you do anything kind of physically active of this nature, it's kind of retrospect. It's after the fact. You look back and you go, actually physiologically, that will, your body's flooded with endorphins and everything else. So you got that kind of natural high from that. But you're looking back and go, actually, I did that. That kind of vindication of the effort, of the initial commitment to leave the front door. And you go, okay, I did that. I can do that again. And actually, I feel really good. I want this feeling again. And this is that kind of repetition of habit. And then you get to a point where you go, okay, well, I feel the absence of this now, having found a habit which I feel kind of personally connected to, and is making me feel good about myself. And I think that's something that we don't really spend enough time thinking about. We're certainly not taught or educated to this in terms of, that balance between, okay, yeah, work's important. We need to do work. You need to try and find enjoyment in your work. But does it define you, or there's a maintenance side of this in terms of, but what are you maintaining for? Are you maintaining to work more? Or is it genuinely something you find fulfilling in and of itself? And I think it's the latter in both cases. Would you agree with that? I'm sure.
I would agree with that. And I also found for me as well, it was the pride I had in my daughter getting there before me and completing the Couch to 5K, and the fact that she's using it as her stress management whilst doing her GCSEs. So it just she went back to school on Tuesday and was out running Tuesday night. And it was just and she's had to go back to week 2 of Couch to 5K because she's not done it for a few weeks. And it was hard work. But then she went out for a second run, and that was easy because she's 15 and they just bounce. But it was that kind of just if you model it, then others around you then start to do it as well. And it's important, I think, as parents, we want to do that for our kids, don't we?
I think that brings me back to why I'd said to Petia before, when I met her before the recording, that idea of practicing what I preach. If I can't take care of myself, then how on earth am I going to help my clients to do that when they're going through a difficult and stressful time? And the baking is one of those things. One of the areas where I found flow was in colouring in, and it can sound really simple and really basic, but actually it was really, really great way for me to get into that sense of flow. And there wasn't a kind of building towards like a big project, but I've got a colouring in book, and that's fine. If it takes me another 3 years to finish it, I'm cool with that. But yeah.
Funny you should mention colouring, Emma. A friend of mine gave me a cocktail colouring book just as first lockdown started. And it's taken me 2 years, but I did complete it a couple of weeks ago, and I was so proud of that. I believe I sent a video to Kat with all my cocktail coloring, and I think the typical question was, when am I going to actually try all the cocktails on the coloring book? Kat.
No, it was fun. It was fantastic. I loved watching the video of your completed coloring book. Well, one, because I love cocktails, but actually the real thing was the seeing as a physical object the amount of time that you'd offered to yourself to do this activity. And that was actually what really moved me, even though obviously, margaritas would be second on the list.
Well, that is funny, but I was even multitasking doing that, because I would listen to my audiobooks, and I can't just listen to my audiobooks and not do anything. And I was doing coloring. And the interesting thing, listening to both Emma and Laura's stories about the physicality and the switching off, I've been, over the last couple of years, kind of almost over COVID, I've been taking adult swimming lessons. I could swim, but I just had no technique, so I'll just paddle. And I've been learning how to do that. And the thing that I find both most enjoyable, but also completely almost panic attack challenging, has been being left alone with my thoughts while swimming. Because the swimming is great for that. You're there in the water in the moment, but you're not, your brain, your eyes, your ears are not stimulated in a different way. So at the end of a swimming practice, that's the bit that I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed that kind of mindfulness or mindlessness. But at the beginning of each swimming session, I have near panic attacks in my first couple of lengths, about just kind of getting my brain to be in the moment and not panic about what is my brain going to do with that moment if I'm not distracted in different ways. And I really think is that the kind of that overstimulation that we're currently experiencing in the modern age of technology. So it's been really interesting to kind of listen to you and reflect on both aspects of the physicality and learning and the fitness, as well as switching off. Sam.
Yeah, that's a really, really nice example there, the swimming. And I was thinking about this, and then you kind of alluded to it in the last part of what you were just describing there, in terms of what we tend to look for is that kind of return on investment, right? So you're talking about, what I'm using that moment for. Yeah, so that return on investment, and so often when we're in the world of work, okay, I have X number of hours in the day to do work. What I need to do is this. That's my return on investment. It's easy to quantify, it's easy to measure, but also we're accountable to that work. And therein lies the pressure and the tension, right? And anxiety and all of the other baggage. But actually, when you're doing something like swimming or baking or running or whatever, the return on investment is quite different. And I think that's the return on investment doesn't really come into it as an economic kind of thing, and is in the same way as we would with our professional lives. And I think, again, that's a key distinction, is when we're, that coming back to that notion of kind of autotelicism, the doing of the activity is the motivation, the goal in and of itself. You're swimming, you're there, the intentional effort and action is doing that. Yes, it frees up your brain to do other things. And I think that, again, is this is the key thing for me. And everything that I'm hearing is it's a discipline. There's a discipline to all of this, and you can't. And I think it was Emma kind of turning things on or turning things off. It's absolutely, but it's not a light switch job, is it? You don't go, right, okay, and now the lights. There's a light switch here. I'm just turning it on and off. I'm now at my leisure. Typically doesn't happen. Yeah, listen to Laura's description of, I'm only really in the running after about 20 minutes, half an hour. Yeah, it gives me. There's a transition. Yeah, literal and physical transition in most cases. And I think that giving ourselves time, and I just wanted as well, just to kind of draw out something else that I think it was Emma said, but it's come up again tacitly in everything we've been talking about, is I like the phraseology used in terms of claiming space. We've talked in the past on previous podcasts around reclaiming space. That reclaiming of, okay, it's reclaiming time and space to do the things exactly right. Yeah, in terms of liminal, particularly in that liminal space, as of the pandemic. It's that grey area. Actually, it's given ourselves a bit more discretion than we think we do. Actually, we are the masters of our own kind of timetable, particularly when we're working remotely. We've got things we need to do, yes, by certain times, but typically, as long as we're getting those things done. So I think that's another key kind of point I wanted to draw out here, was all of this is an intentional act. It also requires space in terms of time, but also very often a physical space. And actually giving yourself permission to enter and claim that space for the purposes of your leisure is a big part of this. Kat.
Yeah, that's right. And I completely agree. And I think the challenge is, and really the heart of this podcast is about trying to help all of us to be stronger in that boundary making, to be stronger in that space claiming, to feel justified in doing it rather than to feel guilty or awkward about it, or to lose sight of why we're trying to do those things and why they're important. And that losing of the liminal space in the pandemic for me was about not having differentiated geography, for work and home, because it all just smooshed together. And so whilst, like Sam says, ideally that should mean that when I've done some work, I might then, go and play the piano for 20 minutes for a break because I'm working in the same space as it. But what a shock. That isn't what happened. What happened was at my end of my working day, I'd just carry on working because I was still in my workspace. That's actually what happens. And the commute, that perfect sort of liminal zone where you transition out of work, that went away, So it takes quite a strong psychological position, I think, to do as Sam has outlined, to say, right, that sense of intention, that discipline, that doesn't come easy. And so what I'm hoping really is just hearing from you both today, that's just so helpful to try and give us that mental strength, that commitment, that freedom and choice and permission to say, right, this is the space I'm making for myself and it's justified and I'm going to continue doing it. And so, Laura, the big challenge, for you from what you've said, which I'm going to be joining in with, is how do we do that then, in September and October when it's all kicking off, still holding that space, on the basis that we're doing it just because it helps us. It makes life enjoyable and worthwhile, helps us, makes the boat go faster, but not because we're more efficient, but just how Sam qualified that, making the boat go faster for our well-being. That's what's the boat going faster. I probably have to, for myself, I might change that phrase to make the boat run better. Because I think if I use the word faster, I can see myself psychologically going, that should mean I'm more efficient. That should mean that I'm doing more. That should mean that my personal growth is like on a rocket. No. So I'm going to switch the language to boat running better and picture it as like tranquil and beautiful and think, is this making the boat like that? And to defend the spaces that lead to that. Petty, I imagine you want to wrap us up.
Yes, thanks, Kat. I guess our challenge today would be to imagine what our boats look like and what our boats want to be doing to stretch that metaphor even further. I'm just so grateful to all of your contributions today, to Emma's and Laura's stories and to Kat and Sam's insights. I hope our listeners enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you found some solace in our stories and also a little bit of inspiration if that's what you needed, and possibly a bit of recalibration about how we should be working, living and enjoying our leisure time. I hope you subscribe to this podcast, and I hope you come and listen to us again. And finally, I just want to thank Helga, who's been in the background expertly recording this episode and looking at our technology needs for this recording. Until next time, when we keep talking about leisure, work and well-being. Goodbye, everyone.